The Second World War was drawing to a close, yet the German war machine still possessed one massive, seemingly insurmountable barrier against the advancing Allies. German commanders held a deep and almost sacred belief in the impregnability of their western defense line, the vast complex known officially as the West Wall, but internationally as the Siegfried Line. They saw it not merely as a collection of fortifications but as a psychological bulwark, a concrete symbol of the Third Reich's enduring will and the strength of German engineering prowess. Its construction had begun long before the war, a testament to forward-thinking, albeit ultimately flawed, strategic planning designed to deter any invasion from the West. This monumental defensive network was a source of unwavering strategic confidence for the generals, who believed its intricate design and sheer scale would bleed the Allied forces dry. The entire defense was predicated on the assumption that fixed, fortified positions could withstand the mechanized and artillery-heavy nature of modern warfare indefinitely. They were convinced that the Allied advance, so rapid and successful following the breakout from Normandy, would finally be ground to a devastating halt against this wall of steel and concrete. Every general, from the highest-ranking field marshal to the most junior company commander, was taught and truly believed that the Siegfried Line was the place where the Western Front would stabilize. They pictured a costly, slow, and ultimately futile grind for the American, British, and French forces attempting to force a path across the German border. The myth of the line's perfect defense became a cornerstone of late-war German military propaganda and operational planning. This widespread confidence, however, masked a critical vulnerability that neither the generals nor the designers had fully anticipated in their elaborate plans. The sheer thickness of the concrete walls promised protection from virtually all conventional bombardment, fostering a sense of invincibility among the entrenched German troops. They felt safe, secure in the knowledge that their positions had been designed to endure the worst the Allied air and ground forces could throw at them. The generals believed the line's extensive depth, with multiple belts of defenses, would consume the Allies' limited time and resources. This unwavering faith meant they failed to account for a scenario where the enemy would find a way to neutralize the garrison without destroying the structure itself. The German High Command was so focused on stopping tanks and infantry that they overlooked the human element confined within the fixed architecture. Their strategic hubris in the face of relentless Allied ingenuity would soon prove to be a fatal miscalculation for the entire defense of the West. The planning and construction of the Siegfried Line spanned nearly a decade, representing a monumental and exhaustive effort in military civil engineering. Conceived in the mid-1930s, the West Wall stretched over 630 kilometers, a continuous belt of defense running from the border with the Netherlands all the way down to the Swiss frontier. It was far more complex than simple trenches, consisting of tens of thousands of individual, interconnected defensive structures. At its core were over 18,000 massive concrete bunkers, pillboxes, and observation posts, each designed to withstand prolonged bombardment from heavy artillery. These hardened positions were built into the terrain, often masked by foliage and earth, making them incredibly difficult for advancing troops to spot and target effectively. The most iconic and visually striking feature of the line was the infamous dragon's teeth, which were rows of massive, reinforced concrete tetrahedrons designed to stop Allied tanks and armored vehicles dead in their tracks. These tank obstacles were meticulously laid out across open fields and critical avenues of approach in multiple staggered rows, making the movement of heavy armor exceedingly hazardous. Beneath the surface, the line boasted extensive networks of underground tunnels, command posts, and living quarters that offered German defenders protection, communication, and supply access. The engineers deliberately used extremely thick concrete and complex internal layouts to minimize the effects of incoming shells and bombing runs. Every element of the line, from the depth of the fortifications to the interlocking fields of fire established between pillboxes, was intended to create an absolute barrier. It was a testament to the belief that sheer mass and engineering resilience could triumph over the offensive capabilities of the Allied armies. Labor was drawn from the vast resources of the organization TOD, involving hundreds of thousands of workers toiling day and night to pour the enormous quantities of concrete required. The construction involved sinking deep foundations into the ground to ensure the structures could not be simply undermined or toppled by concentrated explosions. Machine gun emplacements were carefully angled to provide mutual support, ensuring that no single bunker could be approached without drawing fire from at least one neighbor. The strategic intention was to force the Allies into a slow, attritional battle where their technological and numerical advantages would be nullified by the strength of the static defense. Hitler himself saw the line as a permanent western frontier, a visible manifestation of German determination that was meant to discourage any future invasion attempt. The unwavering confidence displayed by German generals regarding the Siegfried Line was rooted in a combination of engineering facts and desperate strategic necessity. They viewed the fortifications as a final, decisive checkmate against the rapidly advancing Allied forces after the debacle of the Normandy campaign. Senior officers often pointed to the sheer density of the concrete and the depth of the defensive belt as proof that a swift breakthrough was impossible for the enemy. Field Marshal Walther Model, for instance, relied heavily on the line's strength to reorganize and re-equip his shattered Western armies, using it as a vital shield. The line's extensive system of interlocking fire, designed so that every section was covered by machine gun and anti-tank fire from neighboring positions, truly made it a formidable obstacle on paper. German doctrine emphasized holding these prepared, hardened positions with minimum reserves, leveraging the concrete to multiply the defensive power of every man. Furthermore, the psychological element was critical, both for the German defenders and the Allied attackers, as the generals understood the demoralizing effect of facing such a visibly permanent barrier. They believed that Allied political leaders would recoil from the enormous casualties that a direct, sustained assault on the West Wall would inevitably incur. This faith was also born out of a desire to prevent the war from spilling onto German soil, which was a strategic and moral imperative for the High Command. They saw the line as buying precious time, allowing for the development of new wonder weapons or a shift in the political landscape of the war. Their confidence was not mere bravado but a deep-seated conviction that the Allied logistics lines were stretched, and their momentum was about to be broken by this carefully prepared, nearly impregnable fortification system. The defense plan was simple: the concrete would absorb the shells, and the defenders would annihilate the infantry that followed. They had studied the failures of the Maginot Line but felt the Siegfried Line's linear design and greater density of small, hard positions made it superior. The generals were convinced that the Allied forces would be forced into a costly siege operation, buying Germany invaluable months for its own counter-preparations. This reliance on fixed defense ultimately blinded them to the possibility of a tactical solution that did not involve brute force destruction. Following the successful sweep through France in the summer of 1944, the momentum of the Allied armies seemed unstoppable. Yet this rapid advance eventually brought them face to face with the daunting reality of the Siegfried Line. American and British forces, flushed with victory, suddenly encountered a dramatic shift in the pace and nature of the fighting as they approached the German border. The easy rolling terrain of France gave way to the dense forests and rugged hills that concealed the main belt of the West Wall's defenses. Initial patrols and reconnaissance missions quickly confirmed the scale of the fortified area, instantly dispelling any lingering hopes of a swift, unopposed crossing into the Rye. The advance slowed dramatically as units began to report encountering the first dense rows of dragon's teeth and carefully concealed concrete pillboxes. Commanders realized the campaign was about to transition from a war of maneuver into a brutal, grinding siege warfare environment reminiscent of the First World War. Supply lines, already stretched thin by the speed of the earlier offensive, struggled to bring up the immense quantities of heavy artillery and specialized engineering equipment now desperately needed for the assault. The atmosphere among the troops changed from triumphant to grimly determined, as the soldiers understood they were facing a pre-planned, deeply entrenched enemy on his home ground. This initial contact confirmed the German general's expectations, as the Allied advance, previously measured in dozens of kilometers per day, now crawled forward at a painful, costly pace. The early fighting was characterized by frustrating, bloody skirmishes where small detachments of German defenders in their concrete strongholds could inflict disproportionate casualties on the exposed attackers. Every approach was covered, every field was mined, and every movement drew immediate, concentrated machine gun fire from unseen positions. The realization set in that the Allies were no longer pursuing a defeated and disorganized enemy but were confronting a prepared, formidable defensive structure. The sheer scale of the anti-tank obstacles alone forced armored units to halt and wait for engineers to clear the path, further delaying the momentum of the offensive. This slowdown on the German frontier represented a crucial turning point, signaling a shift to the costly, protracted battles that would define the remainder of the war in the West. The initial Allied attempts to breach the Siegfried Line were met with staggering difficulty and horrific casualties, quickly exposing the defensive line's tactical genius. The dense, staggered rows of dragon's teeth effectively funneled Allied armor into pre-sighted killing zones, where concealed anti-tank guns waited to spring their traps. Every pillbox and bunker was positioned to cover the approaches to its neighbors, creating a devastating web of interlocking fields of fire that made any movement in the open virtually suicidal for infantry. Machine gun nests, firing from the hardened concrete embrasures, spat out a continuous stream of bullets that swept the ground and denied the attackers any secure foothold. The sheer number of mines, barbed wire entanglements, and booby traps that had been laid in the foreground of the main defenses further complicated and slowed the advance of the American GIS. Infantry assaults, even when preceded by intense artillery preparation, often faltered before they could even reach the primary defensive structures. The German defenders, snug within their steel and concrete shells, simply waited for the barrage to lift before resuming their devastating fire. The conventional tactic of infantry overwhelming a position after a bombardment proved ineffective against the deeply buried and heavily armored pillboxes. Commanders quickly had to re-evaluate their entire approach, realizing that massed infantry attacks were nothing more than a recipe for mass slaughter against such prepared defenses. The challenge was not just fighting the German soldier, but fighting the concrete and steel that protected him from all but the most direct and fortunate hit from a very large caliber shell. The inability of tank destroyers and direct-fire weapons to penetrate the frontal armor of the pillboxes created a massive bottleneck for the advancing troops. Even when units successfully reached a bunker, placing satchel charges or magnetic mines required impossible levels of exposure to concentrated German fire. This early, brutal phase of the battle for the Siegfried Line was a costly baptism of fire, forcing a painful recognition of the line's defensive mastery. The American war machine, accustomed to rolling quickly, found itself utterly stymied by the sheer resilience of the enemy's pre-engineered positions. At the heart of the Siegfried Line's strength lay the critical bunker problem, a severe headache for Allied military planners and a source of great pride for the German generals. These concrete fortifications were the absolute linchpin of the entire defense, designed to be practically impervious to the standard weapons of an advancing infantry division. The walls and roofs of the primary pillboxes were often several meters thick, poured from reinforced concrete that could easily shrug off a direct hit from the common 105 mm artillery rounds used by the Allies. Even the larger 155 mm howitzers struggled to achieve anything more than superficial damage, chipping the concrete without penetrating the crucial defensive space within. The firing slits, the only external weakness, were narrow, angled, and protected by heavy steel plates, making them nearly impossible targets for direct fire from a distance. Furthermore, the bunkers were semi-submerged and often camouflaged, making them difficult to locate accurately for precision strikes in the first place. Infantry carrying powerful explosives like satchel charges had to reach the bunker's very walls, a feat that required crossing a highly exposed, heavily defended zone. The German strategy was simple: let the artillery waste its ammunition on the concrete, and then let the machine guns inside deal with the surviving infantry. This defensive architecture effectively neutralized the Allies' overwhelming advantage in artillery and air power, forcing the fight down to a gruesome, house-to-house style of combat on a grand, linear scale. The pillboxes could not be bypassed because their interlocking fire would destroy any troops that attempted to move around them, leaving demolition or frontal assault as the only terrible options. The internal construction often included multiple rooms and layers of blast protection, ensuring that even a successful small penetration would not instantly incapacitate the entire garrison. Ventilation systems were designed to keep the air fresh and the defenders ready to fight, despite the external chaos of a sustained bombardment. The concrete fortress remained fundamentally sound, preserving the combat effectiveness of the German soldiers regardless of the sheer volume of high-explosive shells landing nearby. This enduring strength of the pillboxes forced the Allies into a desperate and prolonged search for a tactical answer that could bypass the wall of concrete. The grinding, costly failure of initial tactics against the concrete defenses quickly drove Allied commanders to a state of desperate innovation to maintain their momentum. They understood that the war would become a bloody stalemate if they could not find a specialized tool to neutralize the bunkers efficiently and quickly. Conventional approaches were failing consistently, proving too slow and resulting in an unacceptable toll of human life among the attacking forces. Standard riflemen and even specialized assault teams equipped with demolition charges were being decimated trying to close the distance to the impervious concrete structures. The need was not for more firepower in general, but for a highly focused, close-range weapon that could breach or incapacitate the defenders within the pillboxes without requiring engineers to stand exposed on the doorstep. American tactical doctrine began to pivot away from relying solely on massed artillery towards finding ways to use combat engineers as shock troops with specialized breaching tools. This critical shift in focus moved from trying to physically destroy the entire bunker, which was often impossible, to finding a way to eliminate the German defenders inside. Planners began to seriously consider the tactical role of weapons that could project heat, smoke, and sheer psychological terror into the smallest openings of the fortifications. The failure of existing methods created a powerful urgency within the combat engineering corps to deploy and optimize the use of any weapon that offered a clear and reliable advantage against concrete structures and the hardened men inside them. They were hunting for a weapon that could turn the German defenders' greatest strength, the bunker's closed nature, into its most terrifying weakness. The commanders realized that the only way to quickly solve the bunker problem was to introduce a non-explosive, non-percussive element into the interior of the fortress. This realization led to the accelerated deployment of equipment that had previously been considered too cumbersome or too limited in range for mass use. The High Command acknowledged that the sheer cost in manpower of the current frontal assaults was unsustainable and actively sought out unconventional solutions. The solution to the vexing bunker problem arrived in the form of a terrifying, specialized weapon that had seen limited but effective use throughout the war, the flamethrower. While flamethrowers were not a new invention, their deployment and tactical use against the Siegfried Line were refined into a deadly, highly coordinated assault doctrine. The American M2-2 flamethrower, a man-portable system, became the symbol of this new, aggressive approach to bunker neutralization. This device projected a stream of gelid gasoline, or napalm, in a high-pressure torrent over a considerable distance, capable of turning the area around its target into an inferno. The crucial advantage of the flamethrower was its ability to direct fire into the narrow, previously impenetrable firing slits of the German pillboxes. Even if the fire stream did not fully enter the bunker, the searing heat, dense smoke, and rapid oxygen depletion at the entrance were immediately crippling to the defenders. The psychological effect of facing a weapon that literally projected liquid fire was immense, often causing the German soldiers inside to panic and abandon their positions immediately. Combat engineers, often moving under the cover of heavy machine gun fire, became the principal operators of this weapon, turning them into the essential spearhead of the infantry assault. The flamethrower offered a reliable way to deal with the enemy without requiring a direct, prolonged exchange of small arms fire against a heavily protected position. It represented the ultimate close-quarters solution to the problem of fixed fortifications, replacing the slow destruction of concrete with the rapid annihilation of the enemy's will to fight. The sheer volume of fire a flamethrower could produce meant that the external atmosphere around a bunker became instantly hostile, driving defenders away from their firing ports. It was a weapon that specialized in terror, using the inherent claustrophobia of the concrete bunker against the men sheltered within its walls. The deployment of flamethrower teams immediately signaled a change in the tenor of the battle, forcing German defenders to reconsider the safety of their positions. The effective use of the flamethrower against the Siegfried Line was not a simple matter of hosing down a bunker. It required carefully planned and coordinated tactics involving a dedicated assault team. The typical bunker clearing team consisted of the flamethrower operator, who was the primary actor, and a group of accompanying riflemen and demolition men providing crucial covering fire. The first and most critical part of the operation was the approach, which required the team to navigate the minefields and clear the interlocking fire long enough to reach the bunker's immediate vicinity. Once in position, the flamethrower operator would carefully sight the nozzle to project the stream of fire directly through the narrow firing slit or even down the entrance stairwell. The powerful jet of burning fuel, once inside the confined space, instantly superheated the air, consumed the oxygen, and filled the interior with thick, blinding smoke. The heat alone was often enough to cause second- and third-degree burns on the exposed German defenders, forcing them to either abandon their post or surrender immediately. As soon as the flame subsided, the accompanying riflemen would stand ready to eliminate or capture any surviving German soldiers attempting to flee the suffocating inferno. If no enemy emerged, the demolition men would then safely move into place and detonate explosives to permanently seal or destroy the machine gun and its mounts, neutralizing the position for good. This new, highly aggressive tactic proved incredibly effective, turning the once impregnable bunkers into death traps and dramatically reducing the casualty rates for the attacking American infantry. The successful employment of the flamethrower often relied on a simultaneous diversionary attack to draw fire away from the highly vulnerable operator. The combat engineers, trained to operate under intense pressure, had to be precise and rapid in their actions to maximize the effect of the limited fuel supply. This was a high-risk, high-reward proposition where success meant a major defensive breakthrough, and failure meant the likely death of the entire assault team. The methodical application of these fire-breathing tactics systematically chipped away at the Siegfried Line's defensive integrity, bunker by deadly bunker. Beyond the physical destruction wrought by the intense heat and fire, the flamethrower inflicted a profound and devastating psychological toll on the German defenders of the Siegfried Line. Facing a concentrated artillery barrage was terrifying but survivable, a risk the German soldiers had been trained to endure within the safety of their concrete shells. The flamethrower, however, introduced an entirely new dimension of fear, turning their secure position into a terrifying, inescapable oven. The sound of the pressurized fuel igniting, followed by the sight of the liquid fire arcing through the air and into their narrow aperture, created instant, absolute panic. The fire stream represented an enemy they could not shoot back at or take cover from, as the heat and fumes penetrated deep into the supposedly secure interior spaces. Soldiers who had been ready to fight to the last man suddenly found their will to resist evaporating as the air became unbreathable and the metal fixtures within the bunker grew hot enough to burn their skin. German accounts often describe the terror of the smoke and the feeling of utter helplessness as they realized their concrete fortress was now actively working against them, trapping them with the fiery, suffocating agent. This extreme level of fear meant that bunkers were often abandoned or surrendered much sooner than military doctrine anticipated, sometimes after only a brief burst of flame was directed at the firing port. The mere presence of flamethrower teams on the battlefield began to undermine the entire defensive strategy, forcing the German high command to reckon with the fact that their supposedly impenetrable line had a catastrophic vulnerability to fire. The intense psychological pressure caused a breakdown in unit cohesion, as the primary concern became personal survival over holding the position. The enemy had found a way to weaponize the defender's own protective shell, transforming it from a sanctuary into a lethal enclosure. This morale-shattering effect was arguably the flamethrowers' most important contribution to the Allied effort, turning stubborn defense into rapid capitulation. The systematic application of flamethrower-led assault tactics proved to be the decisive factor that shattered the German general's illusion and led to the collapse of the Siegfried Line. Slowly but surely, the American infantry and combat engineers punched localized holes through the defensive belt, creating critical breaches that could be exploited by follow-up forces. The flamethrowers neutralized the most stubborn strongpoints, allowing tanks and specialized vehicles to clear the dragon's teeth and open up vital pathways. Each successful bunker clearance added to the growing pressure on the German defense, as the intricate system of interlocking fire began to unravel piece by piece. Once a single pillbox was silenced, the adjacent position suddenly became exposed and far more vulnerable to attack, leading to a domino effect across the defensive front. The high rate of surrender among bunker defenders, driven by the psychological terror of the fire weapon, meant that the manpower intended to hold the line quickly began to dwindle. As the American forces poured through the initial breaches, the German reserves, already scarce, were unable to counterattack effectively and plug the widening gaps in the line. The grand strategic vision of a monolithic, permanent defense crumbled into a series of isolated, defeated strongpoints, unable to communicate or support one another effectively. What German generals had proclaimed to be an impenetrable wall ultimately proved to be a highly porous barrier when confronted with a specialized weapon designed to attack the human element within the concrete. The rapid succession of localized breakthroughs meant the line could no longer function as a unified, coordinated defensive system. Allied armor, once stalled, could now move into the deep German rear areas, bypassing entire sections of the intact but now irrelevant fortifications. The collapse was not a single dramatic event but a slow, grinding failure of a static defense against an adaptable, determined, and specialized offensive tactic. The ultimate fall of the Siegfried Line against the specialized tactics involving the flamethrower left a permanent and indelible mark on modern military doctrine and the psychology of warfare. It stands as a stark and powerful historical lesson that no amount of static concrete and steel can withstand focused innovation and determined, close-quarters combat. The German general's faith in fixed fortifications was fatally undermined by a weapon that effectively turned defense into a liability, proving that mobility and specialized tools could overcome sheer defensive mass. The massive, expensive West Wall, built to last for generations and to symbolize German resilience, became a series of ruins that were bypassed and eventually captured in the final push into Germany. The story of the Siegfried Line is a testament to the continuous struggle between military offense and defense, where the introduction of a seemingly simple but terrifying weapon shifted the balance decisively. Even today, the decaying, overgrown remains of the dragon's teeth serve as silent reminders of a failed strategy, a time when a great power put its faith in concrete rather than adaptability. The experience also cemented the role of the combat engineer, equipped with specialized breaching tools like the flamethrower, as an indispensable element of the modern assault force. The line was impenetrable only until the moment the American GIS brought the fire directly to the enemy's doorstep, ending the myth of the unbreachable fortress once and for all. The legacy of the flamethrower in this campaign ensured that subsequent military planners would never again rely solely on thick concrete to guarantee the safety of their forces. It taught the world that the true strength of a defense lies not in its material, but in its ability to adapt and counter the enemy's unexpected technical solutions. The Siegfried Line remains a powerful historical monument, a relic that underscores the dramatic and often unexpected ways that technology and human will interact in times of war.